All right, team. We are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have Jake McKee with me. Jake's got a really interesting background in that he isn't just a person who ships software like a lot of us. He actually works on communities with companies like Lego and Apple. And it's always been a topic I find interesting, like this intersection of product and community. And I actually think going forward, that might even be more important given how commoditized features are becoming. But welcome to the show, Jake. I can't wait to have our conversation. We should start with a little background about you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. First off, I'm always excited to talk to product folks about the community product intersection, which I'll share more about in a second. But yeah, so my background is I actually went to school for product design, and I went to a college that didn't have a traditional product design curriculum, and so I sort of crafted my own. And what that ended up being was a combination of design school and mechanical engineering. And as you can imagine, pretty different worlds, especially back when I was in college. And I always joke that I used to have to sit under a tree and eat my lunch and just sort of, woosah to change direction between, one school and another. But that really left me with a very deep understanding and passion for the bridging worlds, right? So how do we do good work around getting an engineering team to really work well with the marketing team, or getting a marketing team to work really well with the support team? And much of my work comes down to that sort of bridging different worlds. And I did that at Lego many years ago, where I helped build the adult fan community, and that was the bridge between the adult fans, people 18 plus who build Lego for fun as a creative medium, and the company itself, who at that time really had no deep understanding or interest really in these adult fans, right? They were there to create toys and boxes for boys 7 to 12. And, I was struggling at those days to convince the company that it was a 1% of the buying audience sort of footprint. And now it's about 45%. So,
Wow.
a major change in how they think about their own company, in no small part because of that adult connection, right? Not just the traditional adult fans and adult Lego builders, but my 18-year-old daughter, who normally would have aged out years and years ago, who just absolutely loves the Lego flowers, right? And it's some really interesting product choices that they've made over the years to try and target different audiences and expand that footprint, and really get this idea that Lego is a creative medium, not a toy for boys 7 to 12. But I've done a number of things over the years. I've been very, very close to, as you might imagine, as a community guy, where I kind of sit in the hub of the spoke of the various silos within a business. So whether it's marketing, market research, product management, engineering, development, what I do always tends to touch on those things deep enough that I've over the years kind of become an honorary product manager, honorary engineer, honorary marketer, honorary insights researcher, all the above.
I love it. I'd love to learn more about that Lego experience, to the extent that it sounds like when you were working there, that 18 and over community was kind of considered secondary to the 7 to 12 boys segment.
And you're making an assumption it was considered at all.
Yeah, that's right. They were like, what?
Right.
So it was definitely like a lower tier kind of priority. I'm curious, how do you think the community activities that you supported helped change that? Like, maybe it would have just happened on its own, or do you think, no, because we did these things, it actually, accelerated the growth of that from 1% to, 30 or 40?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think that the work that I specifically did and our community team did absolutely accelerated that. It established it in a time and a space where that just wasn't of much interest. Would it have happened on its own without the work that we did? Maybe,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. It's hard to say because we were caught, or we were benefiting from the a big change in the world that we've all seen, right? Sort of the mainstreaming of nerd culture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, the idea of me as a teenager or an adult, building Lego sculptures or going to Marvel movies for date night, or any of these other sort of nerd pursuits would have been like, man, what is he doing? That's weird. That's out of place. And I've long given the example that the kind of the marking of how things went when I started at Lego. It was right after the Lego Star Wars stuff came out for the first time, and it started to rejuvenate a very specific and small but powerful group of Star Wars enthusiasts, right?
Oh, yeah.
Who are also interested in Lego. But at that time, when you'd walk into an office building anywhere really, there might be one desk with from one guy that had some Lego stuff on his desk, and everybody kind of went, oh, that's kind of the weird guy in the office, right? But I was in a client office not too long ago, and the woman I was meeting with said, oh, before you go, I've got to walk you over to this other woman's desk and show you what she's got. And I did. And we walked over there, and there was just a plethora of the Lego Flowers stuff. And this woman started saying, oh my God, this is so cool, and let me tell you all about it. And I can't tell you how much I love these things, and I build them with my kids, and just kind of over the top. And that experience is really common now. Part of that's because the work we did. Part of that's because nerd culture in the entire world has sort of become more mainstream, which I love. I think that's fantastic, right? The idea of hobbies isn't quite as silly as it once was. It seems like we are, especially with younger generations, but even in older folks, the acceptance of hobbying and craftsmanship is much more respected, I think, in a much more broader footprint than it was when we were growing up.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous of the generation coming up now, that they feel maybe more free to pursue kind of these kind of more vertical interests that when we were growing up, you kind of didn't want to stand out too much for being super into like aquariums or whatever your hobby might
be. As I see in your background.
Yes, I've maintained that interest.
And I think that before we switch off of that, to your point about younger generations, I think that one of the things that makes me a little bit more positive about where AI is going is the fact that we have mainstreamed craft culture, right? Creation culture. And without going too much on the AI side, there's when you have an 8-hour workday that suddenly can get reduced down to 2 hours worth of work that you're required to do versus the 6 hours you can automate. What do you do with the other 6 hours? Because I don't think as humans it's a good thing to just send everybody home after 2 hours. I think there still needs to be a sense of accomplishment, a sense of creation, a sense of productivity. You still have to earn money, all these things that are part of the human experience, and net positive, right? Well, hopefully that 6 hours allows us to start being more creative and more, less risk averse, let's say, and more experimental and more challenging to ourselves and our colleagues. And I look at older generations and I think, man, that's going to be a tough transition, really tough transition. I look at my 18-year-old daughter, Gen Zer, and go, I think she'll be all right. I think that's what they've been begging us to allow them to do. And watching her go through high school in a very traditional, mostly traditional curriculum, very similar to what we grew up on, and saying, this isn't working. This isn't right. Why is this so boring? Right. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for these upcoming younger generations to seize that extra time that AI now creates. There's a lot of turmoil and there's all kinds of positive negatives to discuss, but that is one of the ones that I'm excited to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and that does align with history, where whenever there's been labor-saving technical innovation, be it steam engines or electricity or whatever, humans generally get a little bit more leisure time, and they're not like working from dawn to dusk, in the field.
Exactly.
On the farm kind of thing. Tell me, I'm curious. Jake, when you were at Lego and you're advocating for doing more community development work, what was the pitch to management? Because you're talking about an audience that's not a priority for them, and you're also talking about activities that don't involve, as far as I know, like design of the Lego product itself, what's inside the box. So how did you advocate for these kind of alternative activities?
Well, so there's three issues in there. If we break those apart a little bit. So the first one is at Lego at that time, how did I sort of, what was the pitch to management? Let me come back to that one in just a second. The second one was, today, how do I help clients with these ideas that they want to go create more formal pitch or get funding for, or get internal support for? What does that look like today versus back then? And there was a third question in there I just lost, but we'll come back to that. Sure. So let's talk about the first two. So in the Lego experience, the reality was at that time, nobody was interested in, very, very few people were interested in what I was trying to do, and which was to get the adult fan voice more integrated into the company, to get them more support, to encourage them to do more of the amazing things they were doing, like taking a 50-foot square train layout to a shopping mall on a holiday weekend where 5,000 people are walking by and saying, "This is really cool. I want to go buy some Lego now," right? All to zero cost to the company. How do we support that more? How do we challenge them to do a 75 square foot train layout the next year, right? How do we challenge them to add more direct connection to, you can do this, where they may have just been excited about building that train layout and displaying it. I was trying to whisper in their ear and say, have you ever thought about getting the media here? Have you ever thought about working with local toy stores to create some discount coupons you can give out, or a freebie that you can give out? Things that would kind of help everybody, right? Help the retailer, help the club get more attention, and of course help me as the company representative sell more product, right? But that idea when I started was very there was very little interest in it, and to the point that the story I always tell is there was a period in about the first year that I was doing this work that a lot of my colleagues, especially in marketing, wouldn't accept my meetings. I'd send a request to say, "Hey, can I talk to you about a thing?" And they just ignore it or decline it, and that was kind of it. And that happened often enough that what I started doing was I'd go and stand outside their office, and at 2:25, when somebody, whoever they were meeting with, walked out, I knew I had either 5 minutes or 35 minutes, because nobody schedules a meeting to end at 2:25, right? And so at 2:25, that person would walk out, I'd immediately slip in, sit down, and just start talking. And I did that for a relatively short period of time, but enough for them to go, "God, he's gonna sit down and talk to me anyway. I might as well schedule it on my schedule," right? I might as well accept his meeting invites. And in those days and in that particular environment, that was a sort of guerrilla marketing approach to this thing, right? That I just had to force my way in to get them to pay attention, tell amazing stories, beg, borrow, and steal to have them put on small little events where maybe this was your third question, that they weren't necessarily giving design ideas of what went in the box, but actually they were, and I was doing those sorts of things to bring them in and talk to the product development team, to the marketing team, even some of the support teams and logistics teams, just to help them, because they're the people who would face shelves, for instance, and do things, do the merchandising in the stores. There was only so many of those people that worked for Lego, but there was an audience of hundreds and then thousands that were paying attention to the stores all the time and could give us some of that data back, some of that feedback back to us. So those conversations are really interesting. So, very small starts, right? And my obstinance really was the winner of that day, because I just kept pushing and I just kept asking. And every time they'd say no, I'd go, "Cool. That makes me twice as interested to get you to say yes." And I just keep pushing and pushing. But I was always finding ways to tell stories. I was always finding ways to do little small bits that would lead to bigger bits, right? So, trying to do a full-blown project where, we brought in people from the outside, which we did eventually, and now they do on a regular basis, to give feedback and representative voice inside the product development cycle. That didn't happen until towards the end of my tenure, right? It took a number of years to just pick away, just hammer at that wall one brick at a time, trying to tear it down so that there was a better pass through between the worlds. And, the advice I always give, even today, is, start where you start, right? If that means it's a tiny little thing, great. But that you can use that to leverage it to be twice as big, right? It's, and then twice as big after that. But it's this steady stream of, I know what I want. I'm clear on it. I'm using my skills as a communicator, as a connector, not just as a product developer or engineer or marketer, but, also I'm just being human about it. Hey, do you mind if I want to run this past you? I want to get your help. Can lead to all kinds of open doors, right? As we all know. And I think that these days, to kind of break that out from what's happening these days. Oh, so let me back up. You said, how did I convince management? I largely didn't, until they were already seeing enough evidence of that it caused them to have interest, right? So there was many times where I would meet with the CEO or some senior VPs because they'd ask me, or I just reach out and, even though I was, fairly low on the food chain in those days, I just reach out to the CEO and say, hey, I want to meet. I need to talk to you about some things. And then I'd sit down, he'd say, sure, and come on in. Nobody ever does that. Come on in. And I'd sit down and I'd say, hey, here's what I'm working on. Here's the stories. Here's the amazing things that, knowing you and your interest, whether it was a VP, the CEO, mid-level manager, whatever it was, really thinking in advance, what's that thing that's going to excite them? Here's what I need from you. And that's how I got the CEO to start showing up at some of the events on a random basis. And all the fans, of course, went nuts because here's this rock star, third generation family owner of the Lego company shows up in DC at a hotel banquet room to meet all the fans, and they went nuts. But it was chipping away at it. These days, there's a little bit more understanding of this sort of work. There's a little bit more direct to the management conversations. I help a lot of my clients do those sorts of presentations and storytelling. I still think that it is, part of the problem now is it's one of the easiest. It's community connection feels like it's one of the easiest things to just dump when the budgets get tight. I think that's exactly the wrong answer and exactly the wrong thing to be thinking about it. But we can talk more about that later. But it is easy to drop. So I'm less interested in getting senior level management on board as I am getting mid-level management to really understand it and support it and be able to talk about it. And how do you kind of train one layer out so they start training the next layer out so that it eventually gets to the senior level management without any sort of formal presentations and formal requests. It becomes almost a given by the time it makes it to them.
Jake, how do you define community development? I realize that we never kind of scoped it out. I have something in my mind what we're talking about, but maybe it'd be best to hear from you how you think about the definition of this type of work.
Yeah, and I think you're right to put it with this type of work, right? There's a lot of different elements to this, and if you ask 10 people what community means, they'll give you 12 different answers, right? But to me, it is very simple. It is the formal process of finding sort of direct and indirect ways to connect company with customer in a way that leads to shared positivity for both sides. Right? My mantra for many years, 20 plus years, has been everybody goes home happy. The company has to understand what makes the community happy, and make clear to the community they understand that. The same way that the community needs to really be clear on what makes the company happy, and the company needs to be bold enough to just say, we're trying to sell boxes. Here's the problem we're having right now. Can you help us? Right. But because there's this intertwined fair exchange of support where we're all going into it saying, I'm here to help you, you're here to help me, let's do something awesome together. There's something bigger than either one of us involved with this. Good things happen out of that, right? And to answer your question, what is community? To me, it is the formal and informal, direct and indirect processes to make those sorts of connections happen.
That's a very helpful definition. When you look at the companies out there now, who do you think is doing a particularly good job at those types of community interactions to build a stronger and better business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I need to have these examples written down because I swear every time that somebody asks, the examples disappear from my head. But there are some really good examples. One of the ones I helped build was the Southwest Airlines Champions program. Mm-hmm. So they have a support forum for their customers to come in and ask questions of their peers, of other flyers. And they have a champions program, a group of volunteers that really go and help others on their behalf. The Apple support community, very similar. They built a very large, one of the largest communities on the web, thousands and thousands of net new questions asked every day. If you search Google, it goes straight to the discussions for just about any Apple support issues. First couple of results in Google tend to be the support forum. And we had about 200 volunteers that were answering a sizable percentage of the questions every month. And that sort of dynamic. I think there's other examples. I worked with a company called Rapsodo that makes golf launch monitors that stand behind you. When you're swinging into a net in the backyard and it's only 5 feet away, but you want to see if I was on the course, where would it go? Right? How do I? What do I do? What are the stats? What's the head speed of the club? What's the spin axis of the ball? All those things that help a golfer understand how to get that thing to go further and straighter, right? But they asked me to come help them create what I call a community-driven product development, CDPD program, where we were basically creating a means of getting product in the hands of representative voices from the potential customer base well in advance of what would normally be a beta program. Right? Mm-hmm. I can talk more about CDPD in a second if you're interested, but it was basically a way to get that customer voice inside the product development black box while there was still time to make changes.
Is that the type of community engagement that you think has the highest ROI because it results in a better product? Or do you see, how does that compare to the community engagement, after the sale, just to, help the users or customers stay connected to the brand and feel connected to each other as well?
It's a good question. For me, it's not one type or the other, because just the way I would say, is your relationship about date nights, or is it about doing the dishes, or is it about being there when things get hard? Well, yeah, it's about all those things, right? And we are talking, I'm a community guy, right? So I think about things in terms of connection and relationship and long-term connection and relationship, not transactional. And in that sense, where one of those things that you mentioned ends and another one begins, my hope is that enough about your customers that that's a point of insight as you're preparing, what I call the collection stage of product development, right? Where you're getting all your knowledge in place so that you can go into stage 2, which is the product development black box, and do your work. And you've still got customer voice in that black box. And then when you come out and you're verifying that what you made is good and works, and you're doing your beta testing or usability testing, that you still got those voices involved, and you may be changing out who's involved and for how long and what kind of programs and all that along the way. But generally speaking, you are creating these relationships with your customer base throughout and forever, right? How you go about doing it may be very different, like you say, for post-launch engagement versus in that black box of product development. You're not going to have hundreds of thousands of people. You may have 4, right? But they're specifically chosen and recruited to be representative voices, so that when you launch that customer base, instead of saying, if you have to do away with the 1.0 version because you're creating a 2.0 version and it makes everything irrelevant before, that can make people really angry. Unless maybe they hear from their peers that they know and trust that are not the company, right? That say, this actually is pretty cool. It's a pain to make this transition, but it's a really good transition. I'm much more willing as a human to listen to one of my peers versus somebody trying to sell me something, right? And and because of that, where does one type of program end and another begin? I don't know. If you're building advocacy and day one launch advocacy through how you're developing the product, then that transfers into post-launch promotion, transfers into long ongoing loyalty and retention, transfers back into the cycle for the beginning of the next program or project, right?
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Seems like there's a cycle here where it kind of one thing feeds into the next. You mentioned that these types of activities and initiatives can be susceptible to budget cuts. I'm curious, when you work with clients who already have a program, but they need to kind of help explain why the programs should continue and what the ROI is. How do you justify, well, hey, we have these FTEs, we're supporting this community thing. Why don't we just reduce that number? How do you recommend that people measure the impact of these types of activities?
Yeah, and I'll note one point you made. Yes, they are susceptible to budget cuts, but I would say more than that, they're susceptible to deprioritization. That may be because of budget cuts. It may be because there's a new CEO and they just don't understand. It may be because people inside the company who should be supporting these things just don't understand enough about it, right? And so when you're talking about impact, there's a couple of different ways that I always start with anyway for these conversations. One is that how you build, how you get buy-in matters, right? Somebody that, again, you've probably heard the ugly baby syndrome phrase, right? That everybody's seen an ugly baby, but nobody's ever had one. Because once I build it, it's beautiful. And so how are you getting your colleagues? Again, how are you using your skills of human connection to really get people to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the power and the impact is to your customers? So there's the sort of the qualitative and the quantitative, right? So we sometimes have a hard time taking quantitative type of activities and putting it into qualitative measures, right? Everybody always says, well, what's the ROI of community? Well, I don't know. What's the ROI of a conversation? It's of value. You can see where it has value. The idea that we're now connected, and if I get stuck and I see your name on somebody's LinkedIn profile I'm trying to meet, I can reach out and say, hey, can you help me? So was there an ROI to this? Maybe in some ways, right? There's ROI in our conversation because I'm getting out in front of people who might want to hire me for work. But also there's that indirect ROI or indirect impact of building that network, creating friendships, or in our business case, creating loyalty, right? That drives all the other mechanisms. I think with so many companies there, and so over the years, for 20 years now, people have said to me, well, what's the ROI of community? My answer is always, I can't answer that without understanding your business, right? If your business is, this year is a retention year, we don't need to necessarily do anything except make the product tighter and get people to just ensure renewal, right? And companies have those years. They also have years where we have got to figure out how to leap ahead of our competitor and do some really amazing feature ads that wow our customer base because they're getting bored, right? Or they're getting frustrated or whatever it might be. So being able to focus on ideation and relate the work that you're doing in community back to ideation versus retention may be different the next year, right? So it really, I always ask in all of my client projects, one of the first things that I try to understand is what's the CEO's 3 priorities for the year? Because they all have them and they all are supposed to be filtering down. In the community space, we tend to miss those sometimes. We tend to forget about that. And we get really focused on how do we run an impactful platform in and of itself. So how many users do we have visiting? How many new members do we have? How fast do we get questions answered? Which are all very important to the community health itself, but it's not necessarily the impact to the business because it's not tied into what is impacting the business. What is the business trying to create impact around? Now let's see how we can support those metrics.
Well, let's say as an example, Jake, that I were the CEO of a software startup, and we sold software to small businesses to help them like run their business. Maybe their retail, and we help them with their cash register, maybe restaurants and the ordering and that kind of thing. And my priorities for the company are top line growth and revenue through new customer acquisition, but also retaining existing customers because it's a monthly subscription. And then the third is like just brand awareness and loyalty. If those were my three objectives, like move the top line up, hold on to the existing customers, and like get some energy and buzz around our brand. And I said, are there any community things that we should be doing? Assume like we're not doing anything right now. We just build great software and our sales team goes and tries to sell it. Like what would be examples of things that we could consider?
Yeah. So I love this activity. So let's break this down a little bit. I'm gonna kind of walk you through as a strategist who does this for a living. Here's some of the questions I would ask first off to get to that point. And you'll notice I'm not going straight to community just yet. I want to understand the customer impact, right? Because what we're trying to do is get better customer engagement for those things, not create those things within the community itself, right? We're trying to have that be the outcome that we're interested in. So top line growth. The question is with top line growth is always what's inhibiting that now? Because, I've gone into companies before who've said, hey, come talk to us about doing a community project. We've got a problem with our top line growth. And I go in and one of the first things we discover is that they're in a manufacturing problem state where they can't ship product like they need to. And everybody's super angry because the manufacturing process is off target. Or they just did a big, huge recall and they want to fix that problem. Well, I can't fix that problem. You got to fix the manufacturing process first, right? You're going to have mad people until that's the case. However, from a community standpoint, the question becomes, what are we doing as a company to support them through those problems? How, so that they don't get off our platform and go onto somebody else's because they're mad because we're having manufacturing issues or we're having software issues or whatever it might be. That's sort of question one. Question two is, do we have the right channels in place for us to be more transparent than we are in our traditional press releases, right? And how do we use community mindset, not just programs, but community mindset to start thinking about how do we do really effective customer engagement with our communication so that they feel like we're not ignoring them? How many companies sort of have a problem and go straight into the hole in the ground, cover themselves up and work on the problem, but everybody else is going, well, where'd they go? Right. There's a lot of community principle to how do we share honestly about what's happening and how do we have good, an AMA is a great example of that, where, maybe the CEO or the VP of product comes in and comes in front of the community that uses that product and says, what do you got for me? I'm here to answer questions. And he answers them honestly, like a real human. And that can buy you some space to get those changes fixed, right? It is not an inherent responsibility or charge for community folks to say, okay, we're going to drive the bottom line here. It's supporting other ways of making that happen, right? Community is not a replacement for whatever part of your business is failing, right? But it can be supportive in helping those things because, again, relational is better than transactional. And if we've got relational, sometimes I can better understand why we're having problems, right? But moving on to the retention piece, that can be a really great example of how community can be used really well, whether it's a program where you're building a full-scale online community, whether you're doing product preview activities and programs where you're inviting a few people in, showing them what you're doing, and then empowering them at the right time, whether it's 6 days or 6 months or 6 years later to go back out to the community and talk about it. There's lots of ways to get people more excited about sticking with you, right? And I think from my community guy perspective, retention often comes down to another compelling story getting in the way of the story you really want to be telling, right? I want them to come back to us I want them to stay with us when we're actually executing some stuff in relative quiet on our roadmap, because if they just stick around, they'll really enjoy it, right? We want them to keep renewing because we noticed in our data that 80% of the customer base only uses 20% of the features. And if we could figure out a way to get them excited about using those other 80% of the features, they'll stick around forever, but they're not doing that. What's holding that up? There's ways to then find those retention pieces in community activity that isn't necessarily a full-blown community platform. It may just be these small, the Netflix preview club where they send out, the half finished or mostly finished, but not quite, new pieces of content they're coming out with, and allow people to check them out and give feedback. That helps me feel like they care a little bit more about me than maybe Hulu does, who never does that sort of thing. Right. And then loyalty, that one really becomes, and we're kind of narrowing into the more humanistic things, right? Loyalty really is a human response. It's the idea that, nobody's really loyal to a company per se. They're not really loyal to a product per se. They're loyal to whatever they get out of that experience with a company or with a product. You may, if you're loyal because that's what you've always had, that's not really loyalty, right? That's sort of lock-in, right? It's an ease issue. It's not a loyalty issue. But if you are loyal, you're advocating, right? And I've always talked about those two being very tightly connected, because I can be a customer of the software that you're talking about, and it works. It's cool. It's good enough. But if I know somebody there, if I understand what they're doing as a business, if I believe in something, some mission that they're on that's bigger than just making a buck off me, right? If I understand who they are as a company in the world when it comes to how they approach social issues or whatever it might be, then all of a sudden I really want them to succeed, and I want to go advocate for them, right? I want to make sure that the restaurant down the corner that's really good, but is in a kind of a weird shopping center that doesn't often get a lot of traffic, I really wanted to stick around for my own sake. So now I'm all of a sudden telling everybody I know, man, you got to go to this place over here before they disappear, because they're not getting any business, right? It's great. You got to go there. And then I go back on a regular basis when I might want to go somewhere else new. I still go to this place I like because I'm really interested in their well-being, right? Because I had a great experience there, because I know the owner, because when I went in the first time, they were so friendly, whatever it might be that really causes me to create that desire to advocate. And that's really where loyalty comes from for me. It's not this, it's not this idea, if I spend a certain amount of money, then I get a certain reward and therefore I'm loyal. That's not loyalty. That's bribing until the bribe no longer works.
Yeah, I'm hearing like this importance of some kind of connective tissue between the user and the company, often through personal interactions or alignment around values and things like that. And I'm curious, like, most of the viewers of this pod are tech product managers. And so our solution is like, oh, well, we'll keep improving the features. We'll add new features. And the product will kind of sell itself. And the kind of connection to the mission and the company and that kind of thing is usually done by the marketing team, which might be like an arm's length sometimes from the product team. What advice would you have for product managers to kind of maybe bring that community lens a little bit closer to the product development effort, so it's not this siloed approach? Any thoughts on that?
Many thoughts on that. So this, at its core, a big part of my business is doing these community-driven product development programs. And in short, the idea is really putting those representative voices inside product teams, metaphorically and sometimes literally giving them a seat at the table. How we do that breaks down into 4 components: finding the right people so that they're representative of whatever issue you're trying to solve, whatever customer base or community you have, and creating a diverse group of folks. And I don't mean just race, age, gender. I mean skill level, interest level, how quiet or how loud they are inside existing communities. All the things that might create a really interesting group of people that also aren't exactly clones of each other, right? That if you go to a great dinner party, for instance, the best ones are the ones where you sit next to somebody who does absolutely nothing related to what you do, but is really interesting to you, right? I'm not an astrophysicist, but if I sat down next to an astrophysicist and they were telling me about space travel, I'd be like, man, this is so cool. Tell me more about wormholes or whatever, right? Finding that sort of diversity is the first step. Find your group of people. The second piece is the right timing. So are we doing ideation and we just need a couple of people to be present from outside as we're brainstorming, right? Or to get feedback that is more relational than transactional. Marketing research tends to be fairly transactional. I want you to fill out a survey, then I will give you a reward. Or I want you to come in and play with this thing in the two-way mirror room, and I'll give you a reward, right? It's fairly transactional and it's very limited. It's, one session or maybe a few sessions over a period of time, but it's not relational. So we get a lot different things, not better or worse, just different things out of that relational experience. And the idea of who do you put in, when do you put them in? So is it a couple of people at ideation, or is it 4 or 5 people when you're doing early development? Is it 40 people when you're doing 75% mark development level, right? Where you still have plenty of time to make changes, but largely there's something they can really react to and use and test and give feedback on over periods of time, not just as a beta test, right? And then the third piece is outcomes. So why are we doing this? What are we trying to learn? Let's build a program that allows us to learn those kinds of things, right? Again, if it's ideation session, I just want as many ideas as possible to come out of that and some grounding in what those ideas are. But if I'm at that 75% mark, I may want to understand over the next 3 weeks with regular usage, how does this product work? How does it fit into your lifestyle, right? And I want you to be talking to me about that along the way, so that it's not just a, throw it over the fence like market research often does with product teams, where they bring in some outside firm, they tell them what they want, they go throw it over the fence, get some feedback, and then they get a report back. No, I mean, like, we're putting folks in front of the product team to achieve very specific outcomes. And the fourth one is, what are the right activities? How do we keep both product teams and these CDPD program members active and interested in doing things together, so that there is a real bond and connection there? I'm more likely to tell you, I don't like this. This really didn't work for me, and here's why, if I trust that you're really a human person there to listen, and that it's going to mean something to you, right? So those are kind of the big four of the CDPD approach, and how we go about choosing those is really dependent on how do we build an effective program with all four of those pieces. I feel like I may have lost your question somewhere in there.
No,
so I missed part of that. Let me know.
I think that was a great answer, and it just reminds me. I've worked on a lot of different software product development efforts over the years, and the ones that have had the most successful launches, that resonated best at scale, generally are the ones where we had a lot of deep, early engagement with target users as the product was still being designed. And those projects where we were like, they don't know what they need, they're just going to be amazed, and we'll just go ta-da on them. Those are a little bit of a crapshoot. So I think what you're also highlighting is community product development is not just, oh, we ran a focus group, here's the report, but there's like a relationship with this set of users where they feel like they've got skin in the game, and they're rooting for you, and they want to give you like honest feedback if they want you to succeed, versus, oh, they're getting this honorarium, they'll sit for this interview kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the questions actually was how, one of the questions I get on a regular basis, how much do we pay them? What kind of financial incentives do we need to give them? And my answer is almost always, Probably none. I'd much rather give somebody a t-shirt that has the program name on it that we've created a code name for together with them than $100. They'll forget $100 in a matter of minutes. They will wear that t-shirt for years.
Yeah.
Right. When I was at Apple, we did a really cool project, one of my favorite projects of this nature, for our 200 super users, where we were trying to send them a thank you gift. And it was 200 people. We couldn't send them each some amount of money. And there's all kinds of legal issues with just sending money anyway. But our team came up with this idea of doing a luggage tag. It was a blue leather luggage tag with the Apple logo on it. Very cool, very unique. I'd never seen one before or after. It was like this electric blue leather. It was super cool. But we put it into one of those boxes. I've got actually one sitting here, the slow release Apple box.
Yeah.
We made one to fit it. We made a little insert into the box. It wasn't as awesome as the plasticized versions that are in my AirPods I just picked up. But it was just a piece of paper and it fit great. But on top of it, we put a note, and the note was like a paragraph and a half. It wasn't but more than 3 or 4 or 5 sentences. But basically the message was, thank you so much for being on this journey with us. Not much to it, right? It was a pretty straightforward thing, but it was so much more relational than transactional. And when we sent it out, we heard from a ton of those 200 people. And about half of the responses were, this is amazing. Thank you so much. I'm never going to use this. It's up on my shelf as a place of honor and it'll be there forever. And the other half said, thank you so much. I loved it. I've already put it on my bag. I can't wait to travel with it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
And again, if we had sent 3 times as much money as it cost to make each one of those little boxes, they would have said, thanks.
Yeah.
And that's been it. Right. There wouldn't have been much more to it. Certainly no advocacy built up. Certainly no relationship extended or deepened. Just would have been there. And that company that I was doing the project with around the launch monitor, it was really interesting how much joy the 40 volunteers got out of talking to the product managers. Right. It was a level of depth that wasn't just a random marketing person or a random community person like me. It was somebody doing really cool stuff who could speak really deeply to what was going on the product side. That's fascinating. That's behind the curtain. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And funny enough, the other way around, in an everybody goes home happy mindset, those product managers started to get more enthused for the project because they were having people come in and go, what you do is amazing. I want to hear so much more about what you're working on. Right. And I always joke that, I do scale modeling for fun and I do some really highly detailed, very small projects. And I'll bring in something to my family and say, look what I just spent the last 4 hours working on. And it's this big. Right. And they go, oh, that's great. That's very cool. Very impressive. All right. Love it. Okay. That feels okay. But when I go to my scale model friends and I say, look what I did, they're like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like that. And I can trust that that's true. They start asking me questions. They start getting into it and really digging into the details of how I made this thing in the first place in ways that nobody else in my life even knows to ask, much less to get excited about. Right. And I think that dynamic happens with product teams too, where you have these people that you're building relationship with. It's not just some random faceless, nameless customer giving you feedback on a form. It's a real person that has real intent and interest in getting their feedback, positive and negative, over to you because they believe the thing you're doing is badass and they want to volunteer to be part of that. Talk about getting excited for your job again, right?
Yeah.
I've seen product developers start these projects where they're product managers too, that go from like, we're doing some stuff to I can't wait to come to work tomorrow because I'm so excited to share this thing with this group that really understands what we're doing. Right.
Yeah.
It's not us, not the company, not a random customer, but somebody in between.
There's just something magical that you can't replace with a dashboard and a chart. When a user out in the wild says how much, your product or your feature they dig. And then also like when they say, oh, I wish it were a little different this way. I think that really gets your juices flowing in a way that a slide deck that a research agency put together. Like it just doesn't land the same way.
Yeah, and that's still, that deck may be incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said that those decks both inform what we do next and can also be informed by what we learn before they start. Right. So having conversations with people doing this work and having those relational conversations, not just surveying, but a real relational conversation where you're paying attention to nuance, you're paying attention to body language as much as you're paying attention to the answer. How many times have you seen in your life, you say something to somebody and they go, yeah, that's pretty good. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you're on a survey, you're trying to say on a scale of how much you agree to disagree or not applicable, which one is it on a scale on a 5-point system? That's very different than watching somebody react and learning who they are over time and why they're reacting the way they are and that sort of thing. But that can really help you inform what kind of research do we need to go do. Same way, once you get those reports, that can help inform what kinds of questions you ask to validate that sort of research or apply that sort of research, right? So again, it's all one big system. It's not replacing anything. It's really, it's taking a missing component that I think has been missing from modern product development, really, and finding a place for it so that we've got a full system of opportunities and options.
Jake, how can people connect with you or find out more about your consulting services?
Very easy, just jakemckee.com. MCKEE. JakeMcKee.com has all my links, has more information on the community-driven product development, has email address, LinkedIn link, all the above.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming to the pod. I think it's been very thought-provoking. It's a good reminder for some of the experienced PMs out there around the importance of that relational, deep kind of repeated engagements and consistent engagements with customers versus like, okay, yeah, we ran another A/B test. Here's the results kind of thing. Everything has a place. It all comes together. Everything adds a different shade. And really appreciate you sharing your advice and some war stories with us.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me.
You bet. We'll see you next time and take care in the meantime, Jake.
Thank you.
Bye. All right. Some takeaways from my point of view. I mean, talking to Jake, there were 2 projects that I did in the last 10 years where one project was super community driven, where we had users coming into the office at least once a month. And sometimes the same users, and we'd have repeated conversations with them about this like very big product development effort. And then another project where we actually did a lot of user research, but it was a little bit more academic to the extent that it wasn't this back and forth. It was us kind of probing them, understanding, and then we would kind of talk amongst ourselves and revise our plans. Whereas the former one, it was a little bit more collaborative. I think part of that was because the second one was during the pandemic and it was hard to get people inside the office and hard for us to get out. But I also think, maybe the second one was a little bit more of a, hey, we have conviction that there's these new capabilities that are going to be freaking amazing. We just need to put it together and get it in their hands. And there maybe was a belief that there's only so much we can learn from ongoing conversations until we actually get it out there. And I think, that's probably a little bit off from optimal. But this happens all the time in technology, right? Like we fall in love with the technology, right now it's agentic AI. There's a lot of agentic AI startups that have not yet broke through in terms of scalable revenue, even though they've raised, tens of millions of dollars, sometimes more. And part of it is it has been like certainly in 23 and early 24, it was all about building and training new models and proprietary data. A little bit less about, how is the company going to use this capability, or how is the consumer going to use this capability? That always seemed to be something that we would take care of once the model is built out and once we have some more building blocks completed. It's always a balancing act, though. Like if you go all about the customer and you're not building anything, like you're just a market research firm. So that is the art and science of product management. Yeah, thanks to Jake for coming on the show. Feel free to check out more about his work, helping companies embrace more community product development. And if you need any advice for your company, or you're leading a product team and you need a second opinion, or want to help get some coaching for some of your team members, reach out to me anytime. But with that, I'm going to say, let's get back to work. Bye, team.